Domestic violence is more than just a private disagreement between a husband and wife. Domestic violence is a pattern of behavior where one person tries to control the thoughts, beliefs, or actions of their partner or family member. The damage done by this crime goes well beyond the homes in which it occurs. Tragically and too often, domestic violence is a homicide waiting to happen. While the violence may cause injury, it is not necessarily physical. Batterers can abuse their victims emotionally, verbally, mentally, sexually, or financially. The Massachusetts Abuse Prevention Law offers a legal remedy to any person who is physically abused in a family or personal relationship. Please join us as we discuss this problem in ways that you can get help for yourself or for a friend.
There's so many different kinds of domestic abuse. There's emotional abuse, there's physical abuse, and I think a lot of people, when they think of domestic violence, they think of just the physical abuse. But a lot of folks that call us are dealing with very controlling spouses where sometimes the emotional abuse is actually more pervasive. So they're belittled, they're not allowed to work, they're completely controlled, they're told that their parenting skills are terrible, that no one will believe them. There is something that we call crazy making, where an incident will occur and the victim will try to process it and the offender will say, "That never happened, what are you talking about?"
All my girlfriends were sluts. I couldn't go out with them because they were bad influence. So it was like subtle little hints that I really wasn't seeing because they weren't that dramatic. When I was working, it was, control over the money. I couldn't spend my own money. It had to be on whatever he said.
It took me quite a while to understand that the psychological and emotional and verbal abuse is just as bad as the physical abuse.
I wasn't allowed to talk to my families, and he knew I was very close to my uncle. He was like my dad. And I wasn't allowed to talk to no friends, and I wasn't allowed to go to school because he told me that I didn't have legal status in this country. I'm not allowed to go to school, and that was a lie.
It's dangerous and it's not going to change, and it's a pattern that often gets worse.
Abusive behavior that is defined by statute is attempting to cause or causing physical harm, actually an assault and battery, punching, kicking, slapping, or forcing another to engage involuntarily in sexual acts. Up until the late 70s, it was deemed a private family matter. They're no longer deemed a private family matter. We've learned through studies that once a victim is able to flee an abusive relationship, the batterer tends to move on to the next victim. So there's a huge societal interest in stopping this type of behavior. Children who are raised in this environment and witness violence over the years are victims as well. And the Commonwealth has a strong interest in not only protecting the victim of the crime, but also the children who witness this violence, who are victims themselves as well.
We've actually had kids in our shelter that have said it was the best time because it was the first time that they were not afraid.
A lot of moms think that the kids aren't listening because you put them to sleep or something, but a lot more often than not, the kids are hearing everything that's going on and sometimes even seeing what's going on.
My son used to cry constantly. It's not because he was sick, it's because all the abuse, and he was only 2 years old. And after I left my ex-husband, I see so much change in that kid. And you can tell that he just needs to be in a safe place. And until this day, he's so happy. He's 8 years old. He talks about it. He talks about abuse. He talks about how happy we are now without Daddy. He tells me that. And then he tells me, "Mommy, remember when Bobby used to do this to you, he have to keep his hand to himself. So it's because he remembers. So I tell him that that's okay, that Mommy's safe now, we're safe. And I will never again go back or let someone do what my ex-husband did to me.
By the way, we've had 4,000 men come through our batterer intervention program since 1991. Never once has a man threatened any staff member or any other man. Not once has a staff person, male or female, come to me and said, I'm afraid for my safety because of these men in the room. Never once have we had to press an alarm button in order to send in security or reinforcements to help us. That's never happened. And one of the reasons it's never happened is that these men have control over their behavior.
Many of these kinds of people are very chameleon-like, and I used to refer to him as Mr. Hyde. Became increasingly Mr. Hyde and not Dr. Jekyll.
They weren't seeing the two sides for him. They were just seeing, you know, the charmer, the smooth talker. And again, I think that's why it took me so long to get out, because I didn't want to admit that I had that at home with me.
It's very hard for many people in the general public. Even close friends often don't know, because the abuser is able to put on a different front.
He would terrorize me by, when I was in the car with him, and he had the road rage beyond anybody's comprehension. And I could never tell when it was coming. It absolutely terrified me. I thought I was going to die at least 6 or 7 separate times that I can recall very vividly. Driving down the road, and he'd be perfectly calm and humming softly to something on the radio, and all of a sudden some person would whiz past him in another car, and then the game would be on. And he would scream and yell, and I would tell him to stop, and he'd tell me to shut up, and it was so frightening. He might show up in a half an hour, he might show up at 10, 12, 3 in the morning, or the next day, and I had absolutely no idea when he was coming home, or what kind of shape he'd be in when he got there. He could be drunk, high as a kite, calm, laughing, screaming, insulting me, threatening me, and I had no idea what was coming at me.
There are many concerns that victims have, but it starts off with financial concerns. They're very worried about how they're going to make a life if they decide to separate. They're worried about their children. They're worried about whether their children are still going to be able to go to their same school. Are they going to have to move? Are they going to be able to afford things? They're worried about how their family is going to react to them. Are they going to think that she's not a good mother, or she's not a good wife because she wasn't able to keep the relationship together? That's her responsibility. They're worried about religious concerns, whether they will be still accepted at their church, or their church community will understand what's going on.
I stay with him of my fear of getting deported and lose my son. So I stayed in the relationship for a long time until one day I realized that it wasn't worth it.
I knew, and my family made it pretty clear to me, that I made a big mistake getting pregnant that early. And I had to take responsibility and act like a grown-up and keep my family together. And I felt that on top of being a teen mom, you know, to have to admit to my family that I was in a relationship with an abuser, it was just too tough for me to, you know, try to bring it forward. I had to keep the family together at all costs.
They're also worried about being in danger. And I think we can't underestimate the fact that they're fearful that something worse may happen if they make a decision to leave. It's very frightening, and it's valid concerns, because that's a very dangerous time for victims. And so they fear for their own lives, for their children's lives, for their families' lives. They've often been threatened continually, and an abuser carries through on some of these threats. So I think we want to respect that.
I became absolutely paralyzed by fear, and I was afraid to leave, and I was also afraid to stay.
My family did a surprise baby shower for me, When I got home the next morning, I opened the door, and the first thing I see is a flying punch to my face. I had blood in my eyes. I couldn't even see who did it. Then once I wiped it, I realized that it was him. And then after that, I was punched in my stomach, being 7 months pregnant. And I started having problems with the pregnancy. The baby stopped moving a lot. I had to go to the hospital weekly to monitor because the heart rate was going down. There was no movement. We didn't know what was going on with the baby. And I was too afraid to tell the doctor what had happened.
One day I realized that it wasn't worth it because I thought he was going to kill me because he choked me until I passed out. And that's when I realized I had to get out.